It was a cold February evening in Chicago, 2002. The streets were slick with melting snow, the wind biting through coats and scarves. Inside a modest apartment on the south side, a mother paced the floor, her heart heavy with worry. She had called her daughter Jessica Harper multiple times that day, but each ring went unanswered. Jessica, a bright 19-year-old college student with a smile that lit up any room and an infectious laugh, had left for class that morning and never returned. By midnight, fear had overtaken hope. Her roommates, friends and neighbors began calling the police. Within hours, the case became headline news. A young woman, last seen walking home from her evening shift at a local diner, had vanished without a trace. In a city of millions, missing persons cases were common, but something about Jessica's disappearance struck a chord. Friends described her as responsible, careful, someone who would never vanish without explanation. Something was terribly wrong. The initial investigation was thorough but quickly bogged down. Witnesses were scarce, surveillance cameras were rare, and Jessica's last known steps led through a series of dark, quiet alleyways. Officers combed the neighborhood, questioning neighbors, checking phone records, and looking for any sign of struggle. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months with little progress. The trail went cold. Jessica's parents, Martin and Elaine Harper, refused to accept that their daughter was gone. Martin, a retired firefighter, channeled his grief into relentless action. He spent his days canvassing the neighborhoods, posting flyers and speaking with anyone who might have seen something. Elaine, a schoolteacher, spent nights compiling notebooks of leads, possible sightings, and tips from strangers who called their home. Their home became a command center of hope and desperation, filled with maps, photographs, and a constantly ringing phone line. Friends and neighbors pitched in, organizing search parties that combed abandoned buildings, parks, and wooded areas on the outskirts of the city. Jessica's name was repeated in every conversation, every prayer, every flyer tacked to telephone poles. Yet as months passed, the sense of helplessness grew. Despite their tireless efforts, the trail had gone cold, leaving only questions and a growing ache in the hearts of everyone who knew her. Years passed, and the case faded from national headlines, but never from the Harpers' minds. The notebooks were carefully preserved, the maps updated whenever new information surfaced, and the hope of finding Jessica alive remained stubbornly alive, even as her parents aged and their health began to decline. "We knew she was out there," Martin said quietly. "Even if the city forgot, we never would." By 2010, Jessica's disappearance had taken on the aura of legend among local law enforcement, a case that seemed unsolvable. A young woman swallowed by the city without a trace. But technology, patience, and persistence were about to change everything. It started with a single tip in 2018, more than 16 years after Jessica vanished. The Illinois State Police Cold Case Unit had been revisiting old files, digitizing documents, and cross-referencing databases in ways unimaginable in 2002. DNA analysis, once in its infancy, had become extraordinarily precise, capable of identifying individuals from fragments of evidence long thought unusable. A partial sample collected near the alley where Jessica was last seen, stored carefully by the original investigators, was now ready to be tested with this advanced technology. The results were astonishing. The DNA matched an individual already in criminal databases, a man with a history of violence and prior convictions, someone who had lived in Chicago during the time of Jessica's disappearance and remained largely unnoticed by neighbors and co-workers. Investigators could scarcely believe what they were seeing. For years he had blended into the fabric of everyday life, appearing ordinary, even respectable. Now the truth was undeniable. Detectives assembled the case methodically. They cross-referenced employment records, vehicle registrations, and witness statements, building a timeline that placed the suspect in proximity to Jessica's last known movements. Surveillance footage from 2002, previously overlooked due to poor quality, was enhanced with modern software, revealing the faint outline of the man walking near the alley just minutes before Jessica disappeared. Community members, once resigned to the passage of time, were stunned. How could someone so close, so present in the city, have remained hidden for so long? But for Jessica's family, the revelation was a mixture of relief and renewed grief. Relief that the case was finally moving forward, grief at the thought of the years lost and the life stolen from their daughter. In Chicago, the media covered every development, portraying the breakthrough as a triumph of modern forensic science and unwavering determination. The story was no longer just about a missing girl. It was about the power of technology to confront long-standing mysteries, the dedication of a family that never gave up, and the reality that even the most elusive criminals can eventually be brought to justice. As 2019 began, the Illinois State Police Cold Case Unit intensified its investigation. Every detail from 2002 was re-examined with modern tools. Witness statements were digitized and cross-referenced against new leads. Officers revisited the alleyways, the apartment complex and nearby businesses, hoping to find overlooked evidence. The suspect's movements were meticulously reconstructed, using old phone records, credit card receipts, and digital mapping that simply didn't exist in 2002. Jessica's family remained intimately involved. Martin Harper, now in his late 60s, attended every briefing, reviewing every report, memorizing names and dates like a man possessed. Elaine Harper spent hours on the phone with detectives, connecting dots from her memories and Jessica's friends who had since scattered across the country. It was like reliving those terrifying days, Elaine said quietly, tears forming at the corner of her eyes. But for the first time in years, I felt like someone was finally listening, really listening. One afternoon in March 2019, Detective Samuel Ortiz, the lead investigator on the revived case, received a breakthrough call from the forensic lab. The partial DNA sample from 2002 had yielded a complete profile and the match was confirmed. The suspect, Michael Reardon, now 52, had an extensive criminal history, including previous assaults and thefts, mostly committed under different aliases. What shocked investigators most was that he had lived within 2 blocks of Jessica's apartment in 2002 and had even worked part-time at a nearby convenience store. For years he had blended into the community without raising suspicion. The discovery reinvigorated the investigation. Detectives meticulously rebuilt Reardon's movements from 2002, identifying key locations he frequented and people who might have seen him. They also tracked his later residences, noting a pattern of transient living, short-term rentals and jobs that offered little oversight. It was clear he was skilled at avoiding detection, maintaining an appearance of normalcy while carrying the secrets of a violent act. Officers returned to the alley where Jessica had been last seen, now combing for minute traces of evidence with advanced forensic tools. Soil samples were collected, and fiber analysis was conducted on fragments from discarded items found near the location. Each piece of evidence strengthened the connection to Reardon, creating a chain that investigators felt confident would hold in court. Meanwhile, Jessica's friends and roommates were contacted again. Some had moved across the country, some had started families, but every conversation was crucial. Witnesses recalled details they had forgotten, like a man in a dark coat lingering near the apartment complex, or the sound of a car engine that had seemed out of place that night. These recollections, combined with digital reconstructions, formed a clearer picture of the events leading up to her disappearance. The investigation also revealed unsettling patterns in Reardon's past. Old police reports documented his prior stalking behaviors and minor assaults, none of which had been linked to Jessica's disappearance at the time. Detectives realized that in 2002, the focus had been on immediate leads and visible suspects, leaving dangerous individuals like Reardon largely unexamined. With modern analysis, however, patterns of predatory behavior became clear. As spring turned to summer, the investigation shifted to locating Reardon, who had been living quietly in a suburb outside Chicago. Surveillance teams were deployed, quietly observing his routines. Investigators discovered he maintained a rigid schedule, attending community events sporadically, visiting the local library, and occasionally volunteering at a neighborhood food bank. To neighbors, he was polite and unremarkable, a man blending into the rhythm of everyday life. The plan for arrest was meticulously coordinated. Detectives wanted to ensure both public safety and the preservation of evidence. On June 18, 2019, a team of officers surrounded Reardon's apartment at dawn. He emerged calmly, hands raised, seemingly unaware of the storm that had been building for months. As he was escorted into custody, local news crews captured every moment, broadcasting to a community that had waited nearly 17 years for this day. Reardon was held without bail, facing charges for the abduction and murder of Jessica Harper. The indictment was exhaustive, incorporating physical evidence, witness testimony, and the forensic breakthroughs that had finally illuminated what had happened in 2002. His arrest sent shockwaves through the Chicago community, leaving friends, neighbors, and even local law enforcement grappling with the realization that someone who had lived among them for years could have committed such a crime without detection. For the Harper family, the arrest was both a relief and a reopening of old wounds. The pain of 17 years of unanswered questions returned with intensity, but now it was tempered with the knowledge that justice was within reach. Martin Harper said simply, "We may finally have the truth. It won't bring her back, but it brings us a chance to understand, to remember, and to honor Jessica properly." Preparations for the trial began immediately. Prosecutors meticulously organized the mountain of evidence, while defense attorneys sought to challenge the validity of decades-old testimony and the reliability of forensic methods applied to old samples. The courtroom, set in downtown Chicago, was designed to accommodate a public eager to witness the resolution of one of the city's most haunting cold cases. As summer 2019 progressed, the Harper family braced for the trial that would finally reveal the truth about Jessica's disappearance. The courtroom, a stark modern building in downtown Chicago, became a stage for emotions years in the making. Every day, Martin and Elaine Harper sat together, holding hands for strength, while their lawyer reviewed witness lists, cross-examinations, and exhibits that had been painstakingly assembled. Friends and distant relatives traveled from across the country to support them, forming a quiet network of comfort in the midst of anxiety and anticipation. The prosecution opened the trial by painting a vivid picture of October 2002, recounting Jessica's last known movements, the meticulous investigation that followed, and the years of unanswered questions. Detective Samuel Ortiz testified, explaining how modern DNA technology had finally linked Michael Reardon to the crime. The courtroom was silent, the gravity of the decades-long wait hanging heavy in the air. Jurors leaned forward, absorbing every word, knowing that each detail mattered in a case defined as much by patience as by forensic precision. Forensic experts provided compelling testimony. Dr. Alicia Mendez, a forensic scientist, explained how microscopic fiber analysis had connected items from the crime scene to Reardon's belongings. She demonstrated how old evidence, previously thought insignificant, had become invaluable when paired with today's technology. "Science doesn't forget," she said, her voice steady but resolute. Even decades later, evidence can speak, and in this case, it told a story that no one could ignore. Witnesses were called to recall events that had seemed trivial at the time, but in retrospect were crucial. A former neighbor remembered Reardon loitering near the apartment complex on the evening Jessica vanished. A local store clerk testified about selling him supplies that matched items found near the crime scene. Each recollection, no matter how small, became a piece of a puzzle that had remained incomplete for nearly 2 decades. The defense sought to cast doubt, emphasizing Reardon's long-standing record of law-abiding behavior since 2005 and his apparent integration into the community. They argued that memory fades over time and that evidence collected so long ago could be compromised. Yet the prosecution countered, demonstrating how forensic advancements had preserved the integrity of the samples and verified every match. The contrast between old and new investigative methods underscored the importance of perseverance and technological progress in solving cold cases. Family and friends observed the trial with a mixture of anxiety and relief. Elaine Harper, who had spent countless nights fearing the worst, often wiped tears as the evidence reaffirmed what she had always known, that Jessica had been taken by someone who had hidden in plain sight. Martin Harper remained stoic, though his clenched fists and tight jaw betrayed the intensity of his emotions. Each day brought them closer to resolution, yet also forced them to relive the trauma of the past. Media coverage intensified as the trial progressed. Local news outlets broadcast updates daily, while online forums and social media exploded with discussions. Residents of Chicago, many of whom had followed the case in 2002, expressed disbelief and outrage that someone like Reardon could have eluded justice for so long. The trial became more than a courtroom proceeding. It was a communal reckoning with questions of oversight, memory, and accountability. Testimony from Reardon's acquaintances painted a chilling portrait. Friends described him as quiet and unassuming, the kind of person who could vanish into the background without drawing attention. Some mentioned his obsessive tendencies, minor acts of aggression, and peculiar habits which in hindsight aligned with behaviors typical of someone capable of premeditated violence. No one could have predicted that this ordinary-seeming man harbored such a dark secret. One particularly emotional day, Elaine Harper was called to the stand to recount her final interactions with Jessica before her disappearance. Her voice trembled as she described the last phone call, the subtle signs of unease in her daughter's tone, and the ordinary loving gestures that made the loss so incomprehensible. She was just a young woman full of life, dreams, and laughter, Elaine said, tears streaming down her cheeks. And she was taken. But we will not let her story be forgotten. Throughout the proceedings, Detective Ortiz emphasized the painstaking effort required to bridge the gap between 2002 and 2019. He detailed how old leads were re-examined, new forensic techniques applied, and witnesses re-interviewed. "We never stopped looking," he told the jury. "We never stopped hoping." Science, patience, and persistence combined to ensure that justice would eventually be served. The trial also highlighted the human cost of cold cases. Family members shared how years of uncertainty shaped their lives, altering career paths, relationships, and personal growth. Friends and neighbors spoke about the shadow cast over the community, the fear and suspicion that lingered for years, and the collective yearning for answers. The Harper family's struggle became a powerful testament to the resilience required to endure decades of unresolved grief. By September 2019, the trial had reached its climax. Closing arguments were delivered with intensity and precision. The prosecution recapped the evidence, the expert testimonies, and the meticulous timeline that connected Reardon to Jessica's disappearance and murder. The defense reiterated the passage of time, questioning the reliability of decades-old memories and emphasizing Reardon's seemingly ordinary life since 2005. The jury was left to weigh years of painstaking investigation against the human limitations of recollection and perception. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in emotion. Martin Harper buried his face in his hands, sobbing openly, while Elaine wept quietly beside him. Justice, after 17 years, had finally arrived. Reardon remained expressionless, escorted from the courtroom without a word, leaving behind a trail of stunned observers and a family finally able to glimpse closure. Judge Rebecca Martinez, presiding over the case, delivered a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. She noted the deliberate and premeditated nature of the crime, the devastating impact on the Harper family, and the community's long wait for justice. This court recognizes the enduring pain caused by this crime, Judge Martinez stated. Time does not diminish its severity, nor the necessity of accountability. The law will now ensure that justice is not delayed further. For the Harper family, the verdict brought a mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that the person responsible had been held accountable. Sorrow for the years of unanswered questions and lost moments they could never recover. Nothing can bring Jessica back, Martin said afterward. But knowing the truth finally allows us to remember her properly and honor her memory. The resolution of the case also sparked wider awareness in Illinois about cold case investigations. Law enforcement agencies emphasized the importance of preserving evidence, documenting every lead, and utilizing modern forensic methods. Community organizations promoted vigilance and encouraged residents to report suspicious behavior, reinforcing the idea that every small detail can become critical in solving long-standing crimes. Jessica Harper's story, once a symbol of uncertainty and fear, became a beacon of hope for other families navigating the long, painful wait for answers. The Harper family established a memorial scholarship in her name, dedicated to supporting students pursuing forensic science and criminal justice, ensuring that her legacy would contribute to the prevention of future tragedies. After the trial, life in Chicago slowly began to adjust to the long-awaited resolution, though the scars of 2002 remained. For the Harper family, the months following the verdict were a mixture of tentative healing and persistent grief. Martin Harper returned to his quiet routines, walking each morning along the lakefront, where he and Jessica had once taken weekend strolls. Each step was heavy with memory, but the presence of justice brought a subtle, grounding relief he had never felt during the years of uncertainty. Elaine Harper immersed herself in community work, volunteering with organizations that assisted families of missing persons. She spoke openly about her experiences during public forums and school visits, emphasizing the importance of vigilance and persistence. No one should have to wait 17 years for answers, she would tell audiences, her voice firm but tinged with emotion. And no family should feel abandoned by those who are supposed to protect them. The Harper children, now adults themselves, found ways to channel their emotions productively. Michael Harper, who had been 12 when his sister disappeared, dedicated himself to criminal justice studies, inspired by the relentless work of detectives and forensic scientists who solved the case. His sister Lauren focused on counseling and advocacy, helping families cope with trauma and loss. Together, they helped establish the Jessica Harper Foundation, a non-profit devoted to supporting cold case investigations, raising awareness of missing children, and providing resources for families navigating similar struggles. Community response remained profound. Chicago residents, especially those in neighborhoods near Jessica's apartment complex, reflected on how ordinary people often overlook signs of danger. Local authorities, in partnership with non-profit organizations, began to hold workshops on neighborhood safety, communication, and crime prevention. The Harper case was repeatedly cited as an example of how perseverance, community involvement, and modern technology could intersect to bring justice, even decades after a crime. For law enforcement, the trial became a blueprint for reviewing cold cases. Detective Samuel Ortiz led a series of seminars for Illinois police departments, demonstrating how meticulous record-keeping, modern DNA techniques, and thorough re-interviews could break long-standing mysteries. Officers learned to revisit old evidence, not as relics of the past, but as potentially powerful tools when paired with contemporary scientific methods. Time does not erase responsibility, Ortiz often emphasized, and with the right resources, we can still bring closure to families who have waited far too long. The media continued to cover the Harper case, producing documentaries, interviews, and podcasts that detailed both the investigation and the human story behind it. Journalists focused not only on the crime itself, but on the broader societal lessons it offered. The dangers of complacency, the power of community vigilance, and the enduring importance of justice. Social media discussions often revolved around questions of accountability, the limitations of the legal system, and the role technology now plays in solving crimes once thought unsolvable. For Michael and Lauren Harper, the public attention was both validating and exhausting. They received countless letters and messages from other families, sharing stories of missing loved ones or seeking guidance on navigating cold case investigations. Each message reinforced the need for the foundation they had established, reminding them that Jessica's story, though tragic, could serve a greater purpose. Through their work, they hoped to prevent other families from enduring the prolonged uncertainty that had defined their own lives. Meanwhile, Michael Reardon, now incarcerated, remained largely silent. Prison officials reported that he rarely interacted with other inmates and showed no remorse during evaluations. Psychologists described him as withdrawn, with patterns of obsessive behavior that aligned with earlier forensic assessments. In many ways, his continued silence underscored the chilling reality of how someone could commit such a violent act, live decades in ordinary society, and leave families searching for answers for years. The Harper family took steps to reclaim spaces once defined by fear. Jessica's bedroom, preserved in memory for 17 years, was finally repurposed as a study and community resource center. Photographs of Jessica, carefully framed, remained on the wall, serving as both a tribute and a reminder of why their work mattered. The center became a hub for families seeking guidance, volunteers looking to assist law enforcement, and young people interested in criminal justice careers. Anniversaries of Jessica's disappearance took on new meaning. While the initial days had been marked by sorrow and longing, subsequent years were observed with reflection and purpose. Candlelight vigils were held not just in mourning, but in honor of the dedication, perseverance, and eventual triumph of justice. Each year, community members, law enforcement officers, and family friends gathered, emphasizing that the fight to uncover the truth, though long, had been worthwhile. One of the most significant outcomes of the case was legislative attention. State lawmakers studied the Harper investigation to propose reforms that would strengthen cold case units, improve evidence preservation, and enhance interagency collaboration. Policies were introduced to ensure that older cases received periodic reviews, that resources were allocated to forensic advancements, and that families of missing persons were provided consistent communication and support. Jessica Harper's story, once a personal tragedy, now served as a catalyst for systemic improvement. The Harper family also began documenting their experiences in a memoir and digital archive. They collected interviews, photographs, court documents, and letters to preserve the history of the investigation. By sharing these materials, they hope to provide both closure and education, illustrating the intricate balance of hope, persistence, and the role of science in uncovering the truth. Their story was a testament to human resilience and the enduring belief that justice, no matter how delayed, was still worth pursuing. In Chicago, neighborhoods previously defined by unease slowly regained a sense of security. Residents formed neighborhood watch programs, engaged with law enforcement more actively, and participated in community